Thanksgiving dinner was supposed to be another polished Hartwell family performance, silverware gleaming, smiles rehearsed, and secrets buried beneath gravy and good manners. But one bitter metallic taste told Vivian Hartwell the unthinkable. Someone had poisoned her. What her mother-in-law saw as an easy victim was actually a veteran FBI agent with a killer S instinct. And as that single bite was about to expose 40 years of hidden murder.
The moment the Thanksgiving gravy touched her tongue, she knew something was terribly wrong. A bitter, metallic taste flooded her mouth, a flavor she recognized from her years as an FBI agent. It could only mean one thing: poison. But Dorothea Hartwell was about to learn a hard lesson about her new daughter-in-law. She just saw a pregnant woman she never liked, an easy person to harm. She did not know Vivian had worked undercover for 2 years with the Russian mafia. She was unaware that Vivian had hunted down serial killers. She did not know Vivian could identify poisons like other women identify perfumes. And she had no clue her little Thanksgiving scheme would expose 40 years of dark family secrets. Murders were made to look like accidents. Victims were too scared to speak. A history of evil was hidden by charity events and polite society smiles. So what happens when a hunter chooses the wrong target? Make sure you stay until the end, because this story has a twist you will not believe. This is about the mother-in-law who poisoned her pregnant daughter-in-law and the FBI agent who took her down. The gravy boat shook in Dorothea Hartwell's hands as she smiled warmly at Vivian. "I made this batch just for you, my dear." The words drifted over the long mahogany table, sounding like a sweet promise. 22 pairs of eyes turned to look at Vivian. The crystal chandeliers above filled the Hartwells' formal dining room with a warm glow. The smell of roast turkey mixed with cinnamon and the crisp winter air that came through an open window. A timer went off somewhere in the kitchen. A large clock in the hall struck 7 o'clock. Vivian Hartwell placed a hand on her round belly. She was 7 months pregnant and tired from a case she had closed just 3 days before. It was the Brennan kidnapping. 3 children were found alive, and 1 person was arrested. She had been awake for 47 hours straight. All she wanted was to be home in her pajamas, eating old Chinese food and watching bad reality shows. But her husband Grant had insisted. He held her hand that morning, his blue eyes begging like a lost puppy. "Please, Viv, you have to come to Thanksgiving. My mother has been planning this for months." So there she was, squeezed into a maternity dress that felt too tight, sitting at a table that cost more than her first apartment. She was surrounded by the Hartwells, with their perfect smiles, their perfect hair, and their quiet judging stares. "Thank you, Dorothea," Vivian said, making her voice sound friendly. "That is so kind of you." Her mother-in-law's smile was cold. It always was. In the 3 years since Vivian married Grant Hartwell, Dorothea had mastered the art of being sweet and cruel at the same time. Every compliment felt like an insult. Every kind act had a price. Every smile she gave was a warning hidden behind expensive pearls in a Chanel dress. The gravy boat was placed in front of Vivian's plate, making a soft sound against the fancy china. It was dark brown and thick. Steam rose from it in little curls that glowed in the candlelight. "I tried a new recipe," Dorothea said, her voice sounding smooth and practiced. "I added extra herbs, rosemary, thyme, and a little bit of sage. It is your favorite, dear. You need to keep your strength up. Growing my grandchild is very hard on a woman." Vivian noticed how she said the word "my." It was not your baby or our grandchild, but my grandchild. It was like Vivian was just a container for the next Hartwell baby. She had trained herself to ignore these little insults, to just smile and nod. She pretended not to feel the small hurts from 3 years of holidays, family meals, and unwanted advice about her job, her hair, and even how she ate. But this evening something was different. Vivian took the silver ladle. It was heavy and had the Hartwell family symbol on it, a rising lion. That seemed fitting. She poured the gravy over her mashed potatoes in a slow, careful way. It was rich and dark, but it was not sweet. The steam smelled like meat and herbs, but there was another smell too. Something metallic was hidden underneath. Grant smiled at her from across the table. His blonde hair was combed perfectly to the left, just how his mother preferred it. His blue eyes shone with happiness from the wine and being with his family. He seemed happy and at ease. He did not suspect a thing. Vivian lifted the fork to her mouth. The first taste was bitter and wrong. Her 7 years of FBI training took over instantly before she could even think. 4 years in a special unit studying killers. 2 years undercover with a crime family, seeing people die in ways that were not what they seemed. She knew poisons like a chef knows spices, or a musician knows music. This was not the taste of herbs. It was not rosemary or thyme or sage. This was a chemical that should never be in food. She swallowed the tiny bit in her mouth and smiled. She took another far small bite to look normal, just enough so no one would get suspicious. Across from her, Dorothea was watching. Her eyes followed every move Vivian's fork made. She counted each bite that Vivian ate. She was not watching with warmth or pride for the mother of her future grandchild. She was watching with excitement, like a cat watching a mouse walk toward a trap, like a spider watching a fly land on its web. Vivian's hand found Grant S. beneath the table. She gave it 2 quick squeezes. It was their signal from when they first started dating. It meant, I have to talk to you right now. He looked over at her, confused. Gave a tiny shake of her head. Later. Excuse me, she said, her voice steady and calm. I need to use the restroom. The baby is pushing on me again. A few people around the table laughed politely. Aunt Patricia, Uncle William, Grant's brother Preston, and his wife Caroline. There were also many cousins and family friends there. But Vivian had given up trying to learn all their names. Of course, dear, Dorothea said, her smile fixed in place. Take all the time you need. We will keep your plate warm for you. I bet you will, Vivian thought to herself. You want to see how much more I am going to eat. She walked calmly down the hall, shoes tapping on the marble floor. The family paintings on the wall seemed to watch her go by. There were generations of Hartwells, with their blue eyes and blonde hair. They were pictures of wealth and power, framed in gold. Her own face was not among them. After 3 years of marriage, she was still just a visitor, not considered important enough to be part of the family history. The bathroom door shut softly behind her. She turned the lock, counted to 3, and listened for anyone in the hall. It was quiet. Then she moved quickly. She spit the food from her mouth into the toilet and washed her mouth out with water. She spit again. She used her finger to make herself throw up the small amount she had swallowed. Then she rinsed again. She spit one last time. Her hands were shaking as she looked in her purse. Even on Thanksgiving, Special Agent Vivian Hartwell brought evidence bags with her. It was a habit from her undercover work. You never knew when you would need to collect something important. A piece of paper, a receipt, or a sample. A sample of gravy that tasted like death. She used a tissue to wipe the leftover taste from her tongue, put it in the bag, and sealed it. She wrote the date and time on it with a black pen. November 28th, 6:47 in the evening. Hartwell Estate, Thanksgiving dinner. Her face looked back at her from the fancy mirror. She was pale with dark circles under her eyes, and her hair was starting to turn gray. It was the face of a woman who had realized something terrible. Her own mother-in-law had tried to poison her. Vivian put her hands on the cold marble sink to steady herself. The baby gave a strong kick, as if to remind her that she had to stay focused. No, this was crazy. This was the kind of thinking that gets agents taken off their cases. Dorothea was a difficult and controlling woman. She was passive-aggressive and often made Vivian angry. But she was not a murderer, right? Vivian looked down at the evidence bag in her hand, at the brown stuff inside. She could still taste the bitter flavor in her mouth. Her FBI training did not make mistakes. Her gut feelings did not make mistakes. She had relied on those feelings to stay alive for 2 years with dangerous criminals. They were men who would have killed her in a second if they knew she was an agent. And at that moment, her gut feelings were screaming at her. She put the bag in a hidden pocket in her purse, fixed her lipstick, and smoothed her dress. She practiced a fake smile in the mirror. Then she walked back to the dining room with her head held high. The conversation at the table was now about Preston's new job at a big company. Grant's older brother was talking loudly, waving his wine glass around. His perfect teeth shone as he talked about his success. His wife, Caroline, nodded along, but her eyes looked bored, like she had heard this story before. Vivian sat back down. The chair made a small noise as she sat. Even at 7 sons pregnant, she was not used to the extra weight. Her body had changed so much that it did not feel like her own. She looked down at her plate. The gravy shined on the potatoes. The turkey was perfectly sliced, and the cranberry sauce was the kind Dorothea made new every year. She could not bring herself to eat it. Not a single bite, not when she suspected what was hidden inside. Instead, she pushed the food around her plate. It was a trick from her childhood, when dinner with her father felt like a war zone. Move the potatoes here. Spread the meat out there. She would cut everything into tiny pieces, just moving it all around to create the illusion of eating. Her father was always too intoxicated to see the truth, but Dorothea would notice. Vivian knew she had no other choice. Her mother-in-law watched her plate from across the table, counting every empty space. Her smile grew a little wider, a look of pure satisfaction. Is it good, dear? That gravy. It is delicious, Vivian lied. That single lie tasted so much worse than the poison. You have truly outdone yourself this year, as you always do. I certainly try. Dorothea's voice was as smooth as honey. I just want everything to be perfect for my sons, and of course, for my grandchild. She placed a hand on her own stomach for a moment, a motherly gesture that seemed almost real, just almost. But Vivian recognized the cold calculation behind the act. She saw the performance. She noticed how Dorothea's eyes never truly smiled. For 4 years at the FBI, she had studied people just like this. She knew exactly what it looked like when someone was playing a part. Dorothea Hartwell was playing the loving mother-in-law, which meant something else was hiding just beneath the surface. Grant gently squeezed her hand beneath the table. Are you all right, honey? You seem a little pale. She looked over at her husband, then at his mother. She saw the family portrait hanging over the fireplace, the one where her own face was still missing. After 3 years of marriage, she was still invisible, a Hartwell in name only. She's just a placeholder until a better option appeared. I am fine, she said. Everything is fine. But she knew nothing would be fine ever again. The rest of the meal was a complete blur of stress and fake smiles. Then came the pumpkin pie. Vivian said no thank you. My morning sickness is still acting up, she explained, even in the 3rd trimester. Margot mentioned a friend of hers had it for all 9 months. Then they served coffee. She took a cup but let it go cold. She just held it to keep her hands warm, to have something to do. Dorothea brought out her famous apple crumble. The recipe had been a Hartwell family secret for 4 generations. Vivian said she was just too full to eat it. Grant gave her a worried look. She pretended not to see it. At 9:30, she persuaded Grant that it was time to go. The baby. She needed to rest. The drive back to their house felt very long. In the quiet car, Grant took her hand. You were so quiet tonight, he said. Is everything okay with our baby? Vivian just watched the blur of street lights passing by the window. Yellow, orange, yellow, orange. The rhythm was as steady as her own racing heart. I am just tired, she said. That Brennan case really wore me out. I know it did. 3 kids. My God, I cannot even imagine. He gave her fingers a squeeze. But you found them, is what is important, yes. Mom noticed you barely ate anything. Of course she's noticed. She was probably counting every bite I did not take. Morning sickness? Vivian said again. It just comes and goes, even now. Grant nodded, happy with that simple lie. He always was. He saw life in very simple ways, like good versus evil, or right versus wrong. His mother loved him, so his mother had to be a good person. He could not grasp that love could also be a weapon. He did not know that the ones who hurt you the most are often the ones who say they care. He turned the radio on. Christmas songs filled the quiet car. Bing Crosby was dreaming of a white Christmas. Frank Sinatra was wishing on a star. Vivian put a hand on her pregnant belly. The baby moved, a tiny elbow or maybe a knee pressed against her skin. I will protect you, she promised in her mind, no matter what it takes, no matter what I have to do. The small evidence bag in her purse felt like a live grenade. Tomorrow she would finally know for sure. Tomorrow she would have her proof, and then she would do what she had always done when faced with a problem. She would start her own investigation. That night, Vivian did not sleep at all. Grant snored quietly next to her. His arm was resting on the special pillow she used to support her belly. He looked so calm and innocent. He was the same boy she had fallen for 5 years ago, long before she knew what his family was truly like. She just lay there staring at the ceiling. The shadows in the room moved whenever a car drove past outside. The old house groaned and settled around her. The whole world seemed to be adjusting to the cold November air. At 2:14 in the morning, she finally gave up on sleep. She slipped out of bed, trying not to wake Grant. She tiptoed down to the kitchen. The floor tiles were cold beneath her bare feet. She brewed some chamomile tea that she never drank. She just sat alone in the dark at the breakfast counter. The only light was the green glow from the microwave clock. It read 3:17. Her phone was sitting on the counter. She picked it up. She put it back down. She picked it up one more time. She unlocked it. She locked it. She unlocked it again. 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. She was waiting. She was not even sure what she was waiting for. A sudden text message from Grant's mother admitting to everything, a news article explaining that a bitter taste in gravy was perfectly normal. She opened her web browser and typed with one thumb, "What does ethylene glycol taste like?" The results came up slowly. Her heart began to pound. Sweet at first, then bitter. Often causes antifreeze. She kept scrolling down. Causes kidney failure in 72 hours. The first symptoms are nausea, vomiting, and confusion. It is frequently misdiagnosed as the flu or food poisoning. She typed something else. Antifreeze poisoning symptoms: nausea, vomiting, confusion, seizures, coma, and then death. Her hands began to tremble. She almost dropped her phone. She had one more search to do, the one she was afraid to type, the one she had to see. Can antifreeze harm an unborn baby? The answer made her slam the browser shut. It made her place the phone face down on the counter. It made her wrap both arms around her belly, as if she could protect her daughter from the words on that screen. Fetal death, spontaneous abortion, severe birth defects. At 3:41, she finally returned to bed. Grant was still asleep. She lay there next to him, watching his chest slowly rise and fall. This was the man she married, the man she had quit undercover work for, the man she gave up her entire career for because he asked her to. He said he could not bear knowing she was in danger. She had loved him enough to change her whole life, and now his mother might have tried to kill her. She did not even close her eyes until the first light of dawn. Black Friday started off gray and chilly. The news showed more crowds fighting over televisions and cheap electronics. Social media was with videos of people shoving one another to get a deal. The American way of giving thanks, followed by a day of pure greed. Grant left to go golfing with Preston at 7. He called it brother bonding time and kissed her on the forehead before he left. "You get some rest, honey. Take care of yourself. Take care of our little girl." By 9:15, Vivienne was 2 hours away from the city. The FBI field office was just an ordinary building off Highway 12. It was gray concrete with dark windows that mirrored the cloudy sky. A flag whipped in the cold wind, its edges frayed. If you did not already know what that building was, you would just drive right by it. That was the whole idea. Margot Dawson was waiting for her in the parking garage. 3. Section C. It was a camera blind spot they had used a dozen times for private talks. It was the place Vivienne told Margot about the Kozlov case before anyone. It was the place where Margot told Vivienne about her own miscarriage. In a way, it was their sacred ground. "You look awful," Margot said as she approached. She was leaning on a concrete pillar with a coffee in her hand. Her dark hair was in a simple ponytail, the way she wore it when she was off duty. She wore jeans and a Georgetown sweatshirt, a standard uniform for an agent on her day off. "Good morning to you too," Vivienne said back. "No, I am serious. You look like you have not slept for a week. Just one night, but it felt like a very long one." Margot's playful mood quickly changed to real concern. "What is happening? I need to use the lab, and it has to be off the books." There was a pause. Margot did not ask any questions. Not right away. She had known Vivienne for 7 years. They were partners for 5 of them. She recognized that look. It was the same look Vivienne had when they discovered the Brennan children in that basement. They had duct tape on their mouths and pure terror in their eyes. It was the look she had. They finally caught the Riverside Strangler after 4 months of nothing. The look she had when she realized Agent Morrison was a mole for the Kozlovs. It was the face that said something truly terrible had happened.
"Just follow me," Margot said. They went through back hallways that smelled of floor polish and old coffee.
Secure doors unlocked with a swipe of Margot's badge. Every beep echoed down the quiet corridors. The laboratory was almost empty. Just a skeleton crew for the holiday. Dr. Lydia Brennan was there, running some tests for a counterfeiting case. Her white lab coat was a little wrinkled. Her glasses were pushed up on her head. She looked over as they came in. Anna Dawson Hartwell. Her eyes went right to Vivian's pregnant stomach. I heard the news. Congratulations are in order. How far along are you? 7 months. A boy or a girl? A girl. That is wonderful. Lydia's smile was warm and real. She was one of the only people in the entire bureau who seemed to have normal emotions. So what brings you here on a holiday? Vivian looked over at Margot, who gave a single nod. I need a favor, Vivian said. I need a rush analysis, completely and totally off the record. Lydia's friendly smile disappeared, and her professional sides took over. What am I looking for? Vivian dug into her purse and took out the evidence bag. The brownish stain was easy to see through the clear plastic. Poison. I think it might be ethylene glycol, antifreeze, but I have to be certain. Lydia took the bag from her. She held it up to the bright fluorescent light, and her brow tightened. Where did this come from? It came from my Thanksgiving dinner. The silence that came next felt heavy and thick. It was the kind of quiet that happens right after someone says something that can never be taken back. Lydia's expression shifted rapidly. She looked confused, then worried, then like a scientist with a critical puzzle to solve. I can give you an initial finding in 4 hours, she offered. The complete endless last will be ready by morning. The initial report is all I need. Vivian placed the bag on the counter. Are you saying someone deliberately tried to poison you? I am saying that something tasted very wrong. I am hoping you can prove my fears are baseless, but deep down, she already knew the truth. She had sensed it with the very first bite. Lydia promised to phone the moment she knew anything. Vivian and Margot found themselves in the break room. They drank old coffee that tasted burnt. They ate vending machine crackers that were as dry as dust. The hum of bracelet lights outside of her head gave the room a sterile, unpleasant feeling. Margot spoke only when they were completely alone. Are you going to tell me what is happening? Vivian looked down at her own hands. The light glinted off her 3-carat, princess-cut wedding ring. Grant proposed on a beach in Maui as the sun was setting. It felt like a perfect fairy tale back then. She now understood fairy tales were just comforting lies for children. My mother-in-law prepared a special gravy just for me, she explained. She claimed it was my favorite, but I have never told her about my favorite foods. In 3 years, she has never bothered to ask what I enjoy or prefer. Vivian's voice was empty and flat, but yesterday she made that special gravy only for me. She watched me so closely, as if she were counting every single mouthful I took. Margot sat back in the hard plastic chair. That is certainly strange, but it does not prove anything. No, but the bitter taste underneath the spices is proof. It was wrong. I recognize poison signatures, Margot. I worked with the COSOPs for 2 years and saw people die from this exact thing. Antifreeze in their coffee, their drinks, their soup. It was Mupul's preferred method since it often looked like a natural death. Do you believe Dorotha Hartwell tried to kill you? The question hung between them in the silent room. It felt heavy, absurd, and yet true. I believe I need confirmation before I decide what to think. The wall clock ticked loudly. 10:32, 10:33, 10:34. Margot reached out and gave Vivian's hand a reassuring squeeze. Her touch was warm and real, a solid comfort. We will face this together, she said. That is what we always do. Vivian could only nod, not trusting her own voice. She hoped that together would be enough. The call with the results came at 2:17 that afternoon. Vivian was in the parking garage inside her car with the engine on. The heater blew out air that was barely warm. For an hour she had just stared at a concrete wall, her thoughts racing. Maybe it was all a mistake. Perhaps the herbs were simply spoiled. Maybe Dorotha used a strange ingredient that had an odd flavor. Maybe it was just pregnancy hormones making her paranoid. Then her phone buzzed. It was Lydia. She picked up on the very first ring. What have you got? Lydia's voice was calm and professional, but Vivian could hear something hidden beneath it, a slight tremble that she recognized as fear. It is ethylene glycol, Lydia stated. Antifreeze. At the concentration found in this gravy. Vivian, considering the amount you told me you ate, we are talking about a quantity meant to induce kidney failure in 72 hours. A ringing sound filled Vivian's ears. The whole parking garage seemed to spin. She held the steering wheel tightly to keep herself grounded. Are you certain? I tested it 3 separate times. I used different methods. I got the same result each time. And the baby? There was a long silence. Then Lydia spoke very carefully. For a pregnant woman, the effects would be much faster. The fetus would be the first to be harmed. A miscarriage would happen within 48 hours. After that, the mother's organs would fail. A long pause followed. Vivian, who provided you with this sample? Who did this to you? Vivian pictured the chemical formula Lydia mentioned, the very structure of the poison. It was proof that her life and her baby's life were in danger. My family, she said quietly. She phoned Grant from the parking lot at 2:47. Her hands were perfectly steady. Her voice was completely even. Her 7 years of FBI training taught her to wall off her feelings. She knew emotions could get you killed in a crisis. Right now, her feelings were the enemy. Hey babe, Grant said, his voice cheerful and relaxed. He sounded like a man who had enjoyed a 4-hour golf game with his brother. How are you? Feeling any better? I have to speak with you tonight. It is very important. There was a pause. The warmth in his tone faded. What is the matter? Is there something wrong with the baby? The baby is okay. I just need to see you in person. 'Cause it's not wait. My mom wants us to come over for leftovers. She is making that turkey soup you enjoyed so much last year. The laugh that came out of Vivian was harsh and jagged, like the sound of breaking glass. It was the sound of something beautiful shattering into a million pieces, never to be whole again. No, Grant, it cannot wait. Viv, you are making me nervous. What is happening? Please, just get home. I will tell you everything when you are here. She ended the call before he could object. She remained in her car, the engine humming. The heater blew air that did nothing to warm the chill deep inside her. The lab results lay on the seat next to her. Ethylene glycol, antifreeze, attempted murder. Her own mother-in-law had tried to murder her. The idea felt unreal, like trying to cup water in your hands. Each time she tried to accept it, the reality would just slip through her fingers and vanish. Dorothea Hartwell was a respected member of society. She was on charity boards and volunteered at the hospital. She was about to be a grandmother. A murderer. Well, not quite a murderer. Not yet. Vivian was alive. The baby was alive. That meant they still had a chance to decide their next move. She placed a hand on her stomach, feeling the baby shift inside her. It felt like a gentle wave. I will keep you safe, she whispered. I promise you, no one is going to harm you. But as she said the words, she understood the poison was just the start. Whatever secret Dorothea was protecting, whatever she was willing to do, Vivian had only seen the beginning. The truth, when it finally came out, would shatter her world. It would destroy her marriage, her husband, and the family she had wanted so badly to be a part of. She put the car into drive. It was time to head home. It was time to tell Grant what happened. It was time to find out whose side he was on. Grant got home at 7:43. Vivian heard the familiar sound of his BMW in the driveway. The garage door creaked open, and his steps in the mudroom were soft from his golf shoes. Viv, are you in here? In the living room. She had moved from that spot in 3 hours. A folder was on the coffee table. The evidence bag was next to it, and the lab report was on top. Lydia's neat handwriting filled the page with technical details. She had left lights off. The room was dark, except for the pale light coming from the street. Grant stood in the doorway. He was still wearing his golf attire, his face rosy from the cold air. His blonde hair was messy from the wind. He seemed so ordinary, so happy, so oblivious to the bomb that was about to drop. Why are you sitting in here without any lights? He started to flip the switch. Do not. The tone of her voice made him stop. His hand dropped back to his side. What is happening? He asked. You sounded so strange on the call. You are worrying me. Vivi pointed to the chair opposite her. It was the wingback chair that had belonged to his grandmother. Dorothea had given it to them as a wedding gift. She had also reminded them it was an heirloom, worth more than Vivian's family home. Please sit down, Grant. He sat. His gaze fell to the items on the coffee table. He saw the folder, the bag, and the official-looking papers full of scientific terms. What is all of this? Vivian drew a deep breath. She had gone over this conversation in her mind so many times. She had searched for a gentle approach to deliver news that could never be gentle. There was no easy way. There was just the facts. At Thanksgiving yesterday, your mother prepared a special gravy that was only for me. Grant gave a slow nod. I recall that. She was very proud of it. Worked and the recipe all morning. I knew something tasted wrong with it. It was bitter. My training immediately took over. I saved a sample. His expression changed. His confusion was growing deeper. You took a sample of the gravy? I sent it to the FBI lab today for a test, keeping it unofficial. She pushed the report toward him. She saw him pick it up. She saw his eyes read the words, and she saw all the color leave his face. Ethylene glycol, she said, her voice completely flat. Antifreeze. It was a high enough dose to make kidneys fail within 72 hours. For a pregnant woman, it would cause a miscarriage first, followed by death. Grant's hands started to shake. The report trembled. He looked at her, and his eyes were like those of a stranger. He could not form the words. I know. My mother would never. He tried to speak again. She would not. The test results are conclusive, Grant. Lydia performed the test 3 times with different equipment. The results were identical every single time. He shot up from his chair. The legs scraped loudly on the wood floor. He walked to the window and back again, running his hands through his hair. It was a habit he had when he was under stress. It was what he did when he faced something that did not make sense to him. There must be some other reason, he said, his voice full of desperation. Maybe the gravy was accidentally contaminated. Maybe it was some old pot or something wrong with the plumbing. An accident. Ethylene glycol does not just show up by accident, Grant. It does not get into food from pipes or pans. It was put there on purpose. It was only in the gravy that was served to me, he said, but not my mother. His shout bounced off the walls, but Vivian didn't even flinch. He had seen this coming for a while. I am a federal agent, she said, her voice like ice, the one she saved for interrogations. I analyze evidence. It is what I do. I examine the facts, and I find the truth. He just laughed. Evidence that my own mother is trying to kill you? The sound was harsh and ugly, completely without humor. Do you even hear yourself? Do you realize how insane you sound right now? I hear myself explaining what the lab found. I hear myself telling you that someone put antifreeze in my meal. I hear myself asking you to think about who might have done it. The very person who cooked the food. Think about it. Grant's voice cracked with disbelief. You want me to seriously consider that my mother tried to murder my wife and our unborn baby? Yes, that is crazy. That is completely and utterly crazy. The word hit her like a physical blow. Crazy. The word men always used to shut down women who saw things they refused to see. It was the same word they used against her when she first exposed the corruption in the Morrison case. It was the same word her father used when her mother tried to show people her bruises. Do not call me crazy. I am not saying you are crazy. I am saying this whole situation is crazy. There has to be some other answer. Something we are missing. Explain it, Vivian challenged, standing to face him directly. Explain how antifreeze ended up in the gravy that only I ate. Explain why your mother stared at me the whole time I was eating, as if she was counting every single bite. Explain that look she had in her eyes right before she handed me that gravy boat. She was proud of what she cooked. She was just excited. I have spent 4 years studying psychopaths, Grant. I know exactly what it looks like when someone is hiding behind a mask, when they are just playing a part. Your mother is not the warm and loving grandmother-to-be that she pretends to be. There's something dark underneath all of that. Grant just stared at her. She could see him struggling, see the war raging behind his eyes. A part of him wanted to believe her. A small part of him already did. She saw it in the tremor of his hands. She saw it in how his gaze kept flicking back to the lab report, how his certainty was beginning to crumble. But the rest of him just could not accept it. He could not let go of the idealized mother he had known his entire life, the woman who raised him, who protected him, who told him he was her special boy. I have to call her, he said at last. Grant, no, I need to hear what she has to say. I have to give her a chance to explain herself. Vivian's heart dropped in her stomach, but she just nodded. There was no use arguing about this. He needed to hear the lie for himself. Fine, call her. Grant put the phone on speaker. Vivian stood near the window with her arms crossed, watching him press the numbers. Dorothea picked up after the 3rd ring. Grant, darling. Her voice was bright and cheerful, the perfect sound of a loving mother with no clue that anything was wrong. How was golf? Preston said you played an amazing game. He was so proud of that eagle you made on the 7th hole. Mom, I have to ask you something about yesterday. There was a pause, so short it was almost nothing, but Vivian heard it. It was the tiny hesitation before the performance began again. Of course, sweetheart. What is it? The gravy you made for Vivian. Where did you get the ingredients for it? From the kitchen? Where else? Why are you asking? Grant shot a look at Vivian. She gave a slight nod. Keep going. She said it tasted strange. Strange? Dorothea's voice was filled with manufactured hurt. But I made it just for her. Called Margaret. You remember Margaret, right? The caterer from your cousin's wedding? I got her advice on what pregnant women enjoy. I just wanted to make something wonderful and special for the mother of my grandchild. I know, Mom. It is just that Vivian had it tested. The silence followed stretch on. 1 second, 2, 3, 4. Tested. Dorothea's voice changed, losing its warmth. Tested for what? She thought there might have been something wrong with it. Something wrong? A soft little laugh followed, like the sound of wind chimes. Grant, honey, I do not understand. What could possibly be wrong with my gravy? I have used that same recipe for 30 years. Vivian stepped closer. The lab test found ethylene glycol antifreeze, enough to make her organs fail. Another silence followed, this one much longer. Vivian. Dorothea's voice shifted once more. It was gentle now, full of concern. It was patient, like a mother trying to explain a simple concept to a child who could not understand. Sweetheart, I have no idea what you think you discovered, but I would never, ever hurt you. You are carrying my first grandchild. Why would I ever harm you or the baby? The lab results are surely wrong. You know how those places make mistakes. Human error or mixed-up samples happen all the time. I just read about a woman wrongly told she had cancer from a lab error. I personally supervised the test. I watched the analysis. Dorothea's voice was like velvet over steel. You are under a lot of stress, my dear. The baby, your job, the awful cases you handle. It is a lot to bear. Sometimes our minds can play tricks on us when we are tired. Grant nodded. He actually nodded his head, as if his mother's words were making perfect sense. Vivian felt sick to her stomach. Grant, darling, Dorothea went on. I really think your wife just needs to rest. Pregnancy hormones are known to cause all kinds of problems. Anxiety, paranoia, even episodes. I have seen it with my own eyes. My friend Patricia, you know Patricia Morrison, right? Her daughter-in-law had a total breakdown while she was pregnant. She started accusing everyone around her of trying to harm her baby. She had to be put in a facility for 3 months. The message was perfectly clear. Vivian was having a breakdown. Vivian was unstable. Vivian was the one who needed help, and Grant was actually believing it. That might be a good idea, he said slowly. Some rest, some time away from your job. I do not need rest, Vivian said, her voice like stone. I need you to believe me. Grant turned and looked at her, his face a mask of pain and conflict. He was a man trapped between the two most important women in his life. I believe something happened, he said, choosing his words with care. I believe you found something. I just do not believe my mother is the one who did it. There must be some other explanation. His distinction of felt like a knife twisting between her ribs. Grant, we will get to the bottom of this. We will find out what really happened. But I know my mother. I have known her my whole life. She is not capable of doing what you are suggesting. You have no idea what she is capable of. Vivian's voice finally cracked. It was the first hint of emotion she had allowed herself to show. None of us ever do. I know that she loves me, and she loves us, and she loves this baby. She has been Flynn's grandchild for years. She would never do anything to hurt it. To hurt it, Vivian echoed his words. So the baby isn't it now, not her, not our daughter. That is not what I meant. That is exactly what you meant. The baby is a Hartwell. The baby is what matters. I am just the container, just like your mother always says. That is not fair. None of this is fair, Grant. Not a single bit of this is fair. That night, Vivian sat alone in her car, which was parked in their driveway. She had run out of the house right after the phone call. She could not stand to be in the same house as Grant. She could not bear to look at his face anymore. The face of a man who chose his mother's comforting lies over his own wife's hard evidence. The house lights glowed warmly through the windows, looking yellow and inviting. It was the house they had purchased together just 2 years ago. The house where they had made so many plans to raise their family. She put her hands on her belly, and the baby kicked, feeling restless, sensing her mother's deep distress. I know, Vivian whispered softly. I know, I am so sorry. For 37 minutes, she sat perfectly still, just breathing in and out, in and out. She watched her breath make fog on the windshield, and she listened to the low hum of the car's eater. Silence felt heavy, the kind of crushing silence that comes after your entire world has just fallen apart. She thought about the woman she used to be before she met Grant. She was an undercover Egrin agent who had gone deep into the Kozlov crime family, who had spent 2 full years pretending to be someone else. She played a role every single minute of every single day, and she never once let her mask slip. She had been so good at it, so good at becoming another person, so good at surviving impossible odds. And here she was now, sitting in her own driveway, pregnant and completely terrified, married to a man who was convinced she was losing her mind. I am not crazy, she thought to herself. I know what I tasted in that food. I know what the test results showed. I am not paranoid. I am not imagining any of this. The evidence never lies. When she finally went back inside at 10:47, Grant's already asleep on the couch. The television was flickering with a football game he was no longer watching. The lab report was still on the coffee table, right where she had left it. She pulled a blanket over him and stood at the wrong time, just watching him breathe, watching his face in the blue from the television screen. He looked so peaceful, so young, like the boy she had first fallen in love with. But boys have to grow up. Boys become men, and men have to make choices. Grant had made his choice. She went upstairs and lay down in their bed, staring up at the dark ceiling. The memory came to her without warning. It was their wedding day. It was Dorothea's toast, her champagne glass held high, the crystal sparkling in the light. Welcome to the family, my dear. We will make a proper Hartwell out of you yet. Everybody in the room had laughed. Grant had smiled with so much pride. Vivian had smiled and clinked her glass against theirs and told herself it was just a joke, just her new mother-in-law's funny way of welcoming her. But it was not a joke. It had never, ever been a joke. Dorothea did not want to make her into a proper Hartwell. Dorothea wanted to get rid of her. She had always wanted her gone. She was the wrong kind of woman for her precious son. Too working class, too independent, just too much. And now Vivian had the proof of just how far Dorothea was willing to go to remove her from the picture. Vivian closed her eyes. Tomorrow she would begin to fight back. Saturday morning arrived, gray and cold. Grant was already gone by the time Vivian finally woke up. A note was on the kitchen counter. He went to his mom's to talk. He would call later. Vivian knew he was at Dorothea's house, letting his mother calm his doubts with her gentle lies. She crumpled the paper and threw it in the trash. Let him go. Let him believe whatever he wanted. She had important work to do. She cooked some eggs and toast for breakfast. She had no appetite but forced herself to eat. Then she sat at the kitchen table with her laptop. If Dorothea had tried to poison her, this was probably not her first time. People do not just wake up and decide to become a murderer. There is usually a history, a pattern of smaller crimes leading to the big one. Vivian was determined to find that pattern. She began with the simple things. She looked at public records, news stories, and social media. These are the first steps in any investigation. She found Dorothea May Hartwell, born Dorothea May Caldwell on March 15, 1963. Her father was Robert Caldwell, who owned Caldwell Hardware. Her mother, Mary Caldwell, was a teacher. She had a normal childhood in a middle-class family. Nothing in her past suggested great wealth or ambition. But in 1982, her life changed completely. Dorothea Caldwell married Richard Hartwell. He was one of the richest men in the state. He was the heir to a large real estate fortune. The local newspaper called their wedding a fairy tale. Richard Hartwell was 41 years old. Dorothea was 19. Vivian noted the big age difference. A young woman was marrying a much older rich man. They had 2 sons. Preston was born in 1984 and Grant in 1987. Then, in December of 1987, Richard Hartwell died. The cause was kidney failure. It was ruled natural, so there was no autopsy. He was 46 years old. Vivian stared at the death certificate on her screen. Kidney failure. That is what ethylene glycol poisoning causes. Her stomach felt sick. It was just one coincidence. That is all it was. Maybe Richard had health issues. Maybe he drank too much. There could be an innocent reason. She continued to search. Dorothea's sister, Barbara, married James Manning in 1979. James was a successful businessman with many car dealerships. In 1994, he died. The cause was organ failure. It was ruled natural, and there was no autopsy. He was 46 years old. 2 months before he died, He had denied Dorothea's request for a loan from the family's money. Vivian's hands were shaking as she typed. She's just needed one more case. David Porter. She remembered hearing that name at family events. He was an original board member of the Hartwell Foundation. He had known Richard Hartwell since they were children. She found his obituary from 2003. It said he passed away peacefully after a short illness. He left behind a wife and 3 children. That short illness was organ failure. His death was also ruled natural. There was no autopsy performed. David Porter was 52 when he died. Everyone said he was in perfect health. 6 weeks before he died, he voted against Dorothea's plan to move money from the Hartwell Foundation. 3 deaths, all connected to Doro, all helping Dorothea, all with the same symptoms. All were called natural because nobody looked any closer. Vivian called Margot at 11:47. I need you to find some files. Margot replied, Viv, it is Saturday. I am still in my pajamas. I know and I am sorry, but this is urgent. There was a sigh on the other end. What kind of files? Old cases? Unsolved deaths? Anything tied to the Hartwell family in the last 40 years? There was a pause. Then her voice was more serious. Is this about the gravy? It is about a pattern. 3 people are dead, all linked to Dorothea. They all had symptoms of antifreeze poisoning, and all deaths were ruled natural. 3 people, her first husband, her brother-in-law, and a business partner who disagreed with her. Vivian paused for a moment. And now me. I am number 4. Margot breathed out sharply. Good heavens, can you get the files? I can try. But Viv, if you are right about this, then my mother-in-law is a serial killer, and she has been getting away with it for 36 years. The files came on Monday morning. Margot had worked all weekend. After 2 years as Vivian's partner, she knew when to stop asking questions. When Vivian was investigating, you either helped her or you stayed away. They met at a coffee shop far from the city. It was a neutral place where nobody knew them. Vivian ordered decaf coffee, following her doctor's advice. Margot ordered a triple espresso. It was her 3rd one that day, based on the dark circles under her eyes. I found more than just deaths, Margot said. I found patterns. She pushed a folder toward Vivian. Inside were old newspaper articles and medical records. Vivian did not ask how she got them. There were also interview notes from old closed cases. Grant's first college girlfriend, Jennifer Walsh, was hospitalized in 2004. She had a mysterious stomach illness. She had terrible stomach pain and vomiting. The symptoms were like food poisoning, but they never went away. She broke up with Grant just 2 weeks after leaving the hospital. Vivian turned to the next page. His fiancée before you, Samantha Reed, got engaged in 2012. 3 months later, she developed sudden extreme anxiety. She had panic attacks and could not sleep. The doctors found nothing physically wrong with her. She ended the engagement 3 months before the wedding day. Then she moved to Seattle and changed her phone number. On the next page was the nanny, Margaret Holloway. She raised Grant and Preston for 12 years. She was fired in 1991 after a strange sickness kept her in bed for 3 months. She never worked as a nanny again. She now lives by herself in a small town in Vermont. Vivian looked up from the folder.
Where are Jennifer Walsh and Samantha now?
Jennifer is married with 2 kids and lives in Ohio. I contacted her through a friend. She did not want to discuss her time with Grant. She said she had moved on from that part of her life. And Samantha is dead. She took her own life in 2015. Margot's voice was empty. It was 3 years after she called off the wedding. The in the coffee shop seemed to disappear. The sounds of cups and the espresso machine faded away. The only thing Vivian could focus on was the folder. The pattern was becoming clear. There are more people, Margot said. A maid who left after 2 months. A gardener who moved far away. A private chef who now refuses to work for families. Every one of them got sick while they worked for the Hartwells. Every one of them left without a word. And every one of them kept quiet. They were all connected to Dorothea. They were all connected to people who got close to her sons or stood in her way. Vivian closed the folder. Her coffee was now cold and untouched. She has been doing this for decades, she said. Her voice was steady and distant. It was the way she sounded when a case started to make sense. Anyone who threatens her power, anyone who gets near Grant or Preston, she poisons them. It is not always enough to kill. Sometimes it is just enough to make them leave, but she will kill when she wants them gone. Margot leaned in closer. Her gaze was sharp. What will you do now? Vivian placed a hand on her stomach. The baby moved, a tiny elbow or knee pushing against her. It was a reminder that more than her own life was in danger. She has gotten away with murder for 36 years. I will not be just another victim on her list. And what about Grant? The question remained in the air. It was heavy and could not be ignored. Grant believes I am having a mental breakdown, Vivian said plainly. He thinks it is the pregnancy hormones. His mother suggested I might need to stay in a special hospital, just like Patricia Morrison's daughter-in-law did. Margot replied, then he is a fool. He is her son. She has controlled him his entire life. He does not know any other way. That is no excuse. No, Vivian said, meeting Margot's eyes. It is not. She stood up and took the folder. It held the proof of years of hidden evil. I am going to build a case against her. A strong case. It will have that even Grant cannot deny. It will have testimony from the women who survived. It will have lab results, patterns, and proof. And if he still refuses to believe you, Vivian's face grew firm. Then I will know for sure where we stand. Grant came home very late that night. He told her he was at a dinner with a client. He said it was about the Morrison deal. Vivian did not ask any questions. She did not ask why he smelled like his mother's perfume. She did not ask why he avoided looking at her. She went to the nursery instead. It was the room they painted a soft yellow together. The crib was a gift from Grant's father, but Dorothea really sent it. Vivian had chosen the bowl with stars and moons. That was before she knew the truth about the family she had married. She sat in the rocking chair, moving back and forth. The gentle rocking calmed her and the baby. She thought about the other women from the files. Jennifer Walsh and her strange illness. Samantha Reed and her panic attacks that led to her death. Margaret Holloway, living alone in Vermont, her life's work ruined. She also thought about Caroline, Grant's sister-in-law, the woman at family dinners with lifeless eyes. She never spoke, unless someone spoke to her. She had been married to Preston for 6 years and had no children. What had Dorothea done to her? What did she do to all those women? I am not crazy, Vivian thought to herself. She has been doing this for a very long time. I'm not the one who is crazy. She is. The baby kicked inside her. Vivian smiled for the first time in days. We are going to be fine, she whispered. I will find a way to stop her. Outside, strong wind blew through the trees. Winter was on its way. Model. Her own husband was about to become her biggest enemy, all because she was getting too close to the truth about his mother. Vivian was a top FBI agent, but could she solve a crime this close to home? Let's find out. It was a Tuesday evening, 6 days after Thanksgiving, when Grant discovered her secret work. Vivian had made a mistake, worn down by sleepless nights and endless research. She had only meant to rest her eyes for 20 minutes, leaving the folder on the kitchen table. But deep exhaustion took over. 3 hours later, the harsh slap of papers on the granite counter woke her up. What in the world is this? She came downstairs in a fog, her mind struggling to piece things together. Grant stood in the kitchen with the folder open before him. His face was red and his hand was shaking with rage. It is research, she said, her voice hoarse from sleep. Research? He shot back, holding up a photograph. It was the old college ID of Jennifer Walsh, his girlfriend from 15 years ago. You are investigating women I dated in college? I am investigating a pattern, she explained. A pattern? He laughed, but the sound was ugly and broken. A pattern of what? That my mother is secretly poisoning every person I have ever loved? Every woman who ever got close to me? Yes, she said. That is exactly it. Grant just stared at her. The bright kitchen light created dark shadows on his face, making him look older and much colder. You need help, he told her. Professional help. This is not normal, Vivian. This is not healthy. What is not healthy, she countered, is ignoring proof that your mother has been hurting people for decades, that she killed 3 people, and that she tried to kill me. There is no proof, he argued. There are just conspiracy theories and you connecting dots that are not there. 3 people are dead, Grant. Vivian's voice started to rise, her calm finally cracking. All of them connected to your mother, all with signs of antifreeze poisoning. Their deaths were called natural because nobody cared enough to look deeper. My father died from kidney failure, Grant said. He was sick for years. Everyone knew that. He was 46 years old and perfectly healthy until his kidneys suddenly. No family history, no risk factors, nothing. And what about Aunt Barbara's husband, James? He argued with your mother over a trust. He was dead 6 weeks later. Uncle James had a drinking problem. Grant shot back. And what about David Porter, who opposed your mother on the foundation board? He was healthy, 52 years old, and dead in 6 weeks. Grant slammed his hand on the counter. The loud noise echoed like a gunshot, and Vivian flinched. "Stop it," he demanded. "Just stop." Her voice grew cold and steady. "She tried to kill me, Grant. She tried to kill our baby, and I am going to prove it." The silence between them was heavy and thick. When Grant finally spoke, his quiet voice was dangerously calm. "I spoke to my mother today." Vivian felt her stomach drop. "About what?" "About you," he said. "About your behavior. About the fact my wife is going around accusing her of murder." "I have not accused her of anything in public," she defended herself. "I have been gathering evidence privately." "Evidence?" He pulled out his phone and swiped through messages. "She showed me the harassment reports. You have contacted former employees, old family friends, people who have not thought about my family for years." "I am investigating a pattern of suspicious deaths," she said. "That is what investigators do. Your job is to catch criminals, not invent them from paranoid fantasies about my mother." Paranoid fantasies. The words struck her like a physical punch. They reminded her of all the times her father told her mother she was just imagining things. Vivian thought of every case she had solved, every killer she had caught, and every time her gut feeling had been right when everyone else doubted her. And now her own husband, the man who had promised to love and protect her, was calling her paranoid. "Get out," she said in a low voice. "What?" "Get out of this house right now," she repeated, stronger this time. "I cannot look at you. You dare call me paranoid after everything that I have shown you, after the lab results, after seeing the pattern, after all of it." Her voice cracked with emotion. Tears burned her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "You are choosing her again. You always choose her." For a brief moment, Grant's expression softened. She saw the man she had married, the one who promised to stand by her forever, and then the moment was gone. "Maybe I should stay at my parents' house for a few days," he said. "Give us both some space." "Maybe you should," she replied. He went upstairs. She listened to the familiar sounds of a marriage breaking apart, drawers opening, hangers sliding, the zipper of a suitcase. When he came down with his bag, he stopped at the front door. "I love you," he said. "I do, but I cannot support this. It is destroying you. It is destroying us." She did not say a word. The door closed. The car started. Its headlights swept across the living room window for a moment, then disappeared into the night. Vivian stood alone in the kitchen. Television scattered files. Here was the proof of decades of murder, and the proof that her husband would never believe her. Her FBI training stopped her from crying. But after his car vanished, she slid down the wall and sat on the cold tile floor, her back against the cabinets. She pulled her knees up as close as her pregnant belly would allow and stayed there until sunrise. On Wednesday morning, the phone rang at 8:17. Vivian had finally pulled herself up around 6 o'clock. She showered, changed, and made coffee she did not drink. The name on the screen was Agent Russell Konstinkid. He was her supervisor, the man who had always supported her career. Hartwell, his voice was rough and all business. "My office, now." "Sir, I am on maternity leave," she said. "Hartwell." The line went dead. She drove to the office in a complete daze. Her body went through the motions, but her mind was somewhere else entirely. The FBI parking lot was mostly empty for the holidays. She found a spot near the entrance and sat for 5 minutes before going inside. Konstinkid's office was on the 3rd floor with large glass walls that looked out over the highway. His desk was covered in papers and framed pictures of his 2 college-age daughters. He was known for being one of the good ones. "Close the door," he said as she walked in. She closed it. "Sit down," she sat. "I received a complaint yesterday," he said. His voice was heavy and tired, like a man who had been up all night with a problem he hated. "It is anonymous. It alleges that one of my agents is using federal resources for a personal vendetta, harassing private citizens and abusing her position." Vivian's heart pounded in her chest, but she kept her face perfectly calm, a skill from 20 years of practice. "What are the specific details of the complaint?" she asked. "It talks about requests for sealed records, questions about cold cases, and contacting witnesses from old investigations." He leaned forward, his eyes sharp and serious. The complaint alleges that this agent believes her mother-in-law is a serial killer. It says she is trying to manufacture evidence to support this delusion. There, it was. This was Dorothy's counterattack. Sir, I am not finished. His voice cut sharply. The complaint came with documents, times and dates of database access, call logs to former Hartwell employees, and proof that someone is building a secret case file. Vivian looked him straight in the eye. I have evidence of multiple murders over 3 decades, all committed by my mother-in-law. Yes, sir, she confirmed. Silence filled the room. All you could hear was the ticking clock on the wall. Constance Cade's voice softened just a little. You are one of my best agents. Your work on the Brennan case was exceptional. You saved those kids. But this case is real too. The pattern is real. The lab tent found ethylene glycol in the gravy sample. Someone is killing people, sir, and I know who it is. Constance Cade rubbed his temples like he had a headache that would not go away. I have to put you on administrative leave pending an investigation. Sir, my hands are tied. Internal Affairs is going to look at everything. The database access, the contact, the unofficial investigation. He paused. If you are right, they will find it. He did not say the next part. He did not have to. If she was wrong, her career was over. I understand, Vivian said. Go home, rest, and take care of that baby. And for God's sake, stop investigating your own family. She stood and walked to the door, then paused. Sir, if I am right, if a serial killer has been getting away with murder for 36 years, and she kills again while I am on leave, that will be on my conscience. Constance Cade's voice was tired and defeated. Go home, Hartwell. So she went home. The house was empty, and Grant's absence was a cold echo in every room. She stood in the nursery they had prepared together, looking at the crib, the changing table, and the mobile of stars and moons. It was a gift from Margot, a little joke about raising the next FBI agent. She had once said, laughing, that you should start them young. That felt like another life. Vivian thought of the woman she was 6 months ago, so happy, in love, and thrilled about their future. That woman was a total stranger now. At 2:37 in the morning, she stopped trying to sleep. She organized the nursery, folding tiny clothes until they were perfect. The pink outfit was from her mother in Florida. Her mother, who had escaped a bad marriage when Vivian was 12. She had raised her daughter to be a strong woman who never accepted abuse from anyone. Mom would be so proud, Vivian thought. Mom would tell me to keep fighting. The yellow one, said FBI baby, a joke gift from Margot. Margot believed her right away. She had risked her own job to look up files and ask questions. Then there was the white one, a soft, expensive cashmere from Dorothea, a gift from the baby shower. Only the finest for my grandchild. Her smile never quite reached her eyes. She watched Vivian open it like it was some kind of a test. Vivian held the white clothing for a long time. The material felt so soft in her hands. The stitching was flawless, the kind of quality that only a lot of money could buy. She threw it straight into the garbage. Thursday afternoon, there was a knock on the door. Vivian did not expect company. She had spent her day in a daze, feeling the baby kick. The knock came again, much louder this time. She thought about not answering it. What if it was Dorothea? What if Grant had sent his mother to check on his crazy wife? But she was an FBI agent. She did not hide from knocks. She looked through the peephole. It was Carolyn Hartwell, Preston S. wife, who had barely spoken to her at family events. The woman at the dinner table with empty eyes who never said much. The woman who smiled on cue and laughed at Preston's jokes. She blended in like part of the furniture. What could she possibly want? Vivian opened the door. We have to talk, Carolyn said. Her voice was strong and different, not the gentle tone she used with family. About what? Carolyn quickly scanned the street. She checked both ways for neighbors or familiar cars. Not out here. May I come inside? Vivian paused for a moment, then moved aside. Carolyn walked in. Her expensive coat was buttoned up tight. Her hair was in a perfect ponytail. She looked ready for a magazine shoot, but her hands were trembling. Coffee? Vivian offered. Please. They sat down at the kitchen table. It was the same table where Vivian researched Dorothea's other victims. The same tusto where Grant had discovered the secret files. The same table where her entire world fell apart. Carolyn held the warm coffee mug, but did not drink. The steam swirled around her face.
I believe you, she said. Vivian's heart to stop beating. About Dorothea, the poison, all of it.
Carolyn's voice was firm, though her eyes were filled with tears. I believe you. Those words just hung there in the quiet room. They felt heavy, impossible. But true, Vivian had dreamed of this moment all week. Someone finally believing her, someone on her side. She never, ever imagined it would be Carolyn. Why? She asked. Why do you believe me? Carolyn, calm expression finally broke. A tear ran down her cheek. She wiped it away with anger. Because she did the same thing to me. The story just came pouring out. 5 years of silence, breaking open like a dam. Preston and I got pregnant in 2019, Carolyn said. Her voice was robotic and flat, the sound of someone telling a story they had replayed 1,000 times. It was not planned. We had only been married for 2 years. Dorothea did not approve. Did she tell you that? No, not in a direct way. That is not how she works. Carolyn's laugh was harsh. It was in her small comments about our age. How Preston's career was just beginning. How a baby would be a huge distraction. How I should wait a few more years. Vivian just nodded. She knew those comments well. She had been hearing them for 3 years. The constant criticism that was disguised as care. I was 12 weeks pregnant when I got sick, Carolyn went on. I had nausea and a weakness that felt worse than morning sickness. My doctor was not worried at first. What happened? I lost a baby at 14 weeks. Carolyn's voice broke. The doctors had no explanation for it. Everything was perfect at the 12-week scan. A strong heartbeat, good growth, and then it was just gone. She stopped and took a deep breath. Vivian waited patiently. Some stories need their own time to be told. 3 days after I lost the baby, Carolyn continued, I found something. I was cleaning out the fridge, and I found an old smoothie container. A smoothie container? I make a protein smoothie every single morning. It is part of my routine. While I was pregnant, I added extra vitamins. Dorothea always praised me for being so disciplined. Her hands gripped the coffee mug tighter. That container was nearly empty. I was about to toss it, but I saw some residue at the bottom. Something just made me look. I really do not know why. I should have just thrown it out, but I felt like I had to look. What did you find? It had a strange smell. It was sweet, but it smelled like chemicals. It smelled like antifreeze. Vivian felt her own heart stop. I saved it, Carolyn said. I told myself that I was just being paranoid, that my grief was making me imagine things. Preston certainly believed that. You told Preston? I too. Carolyn's laugh was broken and sharp. He said the same things Grant is telling you, that his mother would never do that, that I was just upset and needed to rest, that maybe I should see someone for my anxiety. And you believed him. I wanted to believe him. Carolyn looked right into Vivian's eyes. For the first time, Vivian saw the real woman behind the perfect mask, a woman who had been fighting this battle all alone for 5 years. I wanted to believe that my mother-in-law would not kill her own grandchild. I wanted to believe that I was the one who was crazy. She reached into her bag and pulled out a sealed plastic bag. Inside was a small container. It was a smoothie cup, the kind you see in every health store. I have carried this with me for 5 years, Carolyn said. 5 years of telling myself I made it all up. 5 years of watching Tuya pretend to be the perfect grandmother. 5 years of knowing the truth, but being too scared to speak. Vivian took the bag from her. Her own hands were shaking. Have you ever had it tested? No. I was too scared of what the results would show, too scared of what it would mean for my life and for my marriage. And now, Carolyn met her gaze. The perfect wife was gone. The quiet dinner guest was gone. In her place was a much stronger person, someone who had survived 5 years of silent pain. Now I want to help you take her down. They spoke for 3 hours straight. They combined Carolyn's evidence with Vivian's evidence. A clear pattern emerged that went back for decades. Carolyn had more than just the smoothie cup. She had photos of the fridge from that day. It journaled she kept after she lost the baby. It detailed every strange comment from Dorothea. There is still no baby, Carolyn said, her voice completely empty. 5 years we have been trying, 3 cycles of treatment, and nothing has worked. The specialists cannot figure it out. All my tests look perfect, but nothing ever happens. Do you ever think she broke something inside me that day? Whatever she put in that drink was. Carolyn's expression hardened. She stole more than my child from me. She stole any chance I had to have another. Vivian laid her hand over Carolyn's on the table.
We are going to make her pay, she promised the 2 of us.
How? Carolyn's voice was filled with despair. She is a Hartwell. She has judges and powerful people in her pocket. She controls half the charity organizations in this city. She is completely untouchable. She is not untouchable. Nobody is. Vivian's voice was firm and confident. I am an FBI agent. I know how to build a case that will not fall apart. With your evidence in mind, we have enough to start asking some very difficult questions. The FBI put you on leave. Administrative leave, she corrected. Pending investigation, they have not fired me. And when I show them proof of a serial killer, they are going to have to listen. Carolyn looked at her for a long moment. A different expression appeared on her face. It looked like hope, the first real hope she had felt in many years. What do you need me to do? She asked. I need everything you have. The smoothie cup, the photos, the journal. Vivian paused. And I need one more thing from you. Help me find her other victims. I know there are more. Women Dorothea intimidated into silence. People who got sick and never understood the reason. We must build a case that is absolutely undeniable. Caroline showed a genuine smile, the first one Vivian had ever witnessed. I have already started a list. That evening, Vivian finally did not feel so alone. She was in the nursery, looking at the evidence bag with Caroline's smoothie cup on the table. It was the proof she needed that she was not imagining things, that she was not by herself. She knew Dorothea had done this in the past, and she would have continued. Her baby kicked. Vivian put a hand to her stomach. We are going to be safe, she whispered. I have backup now. She finally had an ally. The case was just starting. But for the first time since Thanksgiving, Vivian felt a flicker of hope. On Friday morning, Margot Dawson called at 8:42. I have something, she said directly. It was about the 1987 death, Dorothea's first husband. A witness statement was buried deep in the archives. Vivian sat up a little taller. She had been at her kitchen table since 6, poring over Caroline's journal. It held 5 years of notes and worried thoughts. What kind of statement is it? A housekeeper named Eleanor Mitchell. She worked for the Hartwells back in the 80s. She told police what she saw right after Richard Hartwell died. She said she witnessed something just the week before, something that made her suspicious. Vivian's heart began to beat faster. What did she see? The statement was unclear and mostly blacked out. Someone obviously wanted to keep it hidden. Margot paused.
But she is still alive, Viv, 83 years old and living in a Florida retirement home.
Where? Sunrise Palm, in Clearwater. Another pause. Facility records say she is completely lucid. Sharp as a tack. The nurses told her that she remembers everything. Vivian was already on her feet, grabbing her car keys. I have to speak with her. Viv, you are on administrative leave. This is not an official investigation. This is a personal trip to see an elderly family friend in Florida. The lie came out smoothly. I will be back by tomorrow. Margot let out a sigh. You are going to do this whether I help you or not, are you not? Yes. Then let me at least try to set up a video call first. It will save you the trip. If she agrees to talk, she can do it from her room. It is safer for everybody. Vivian thought for a moment. The drive would be very long and tiring for a woman who was 7 months pregnant. Fine, set it up. The video call connected at 2:15 that afternoon. Vivian sat at her laptop in her quiet living room. Caroline was next to her, a silent supporter. Eleanor Mitchell's face appeared. She had white hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to look right through the screen. She wore a pink cardigan over her small frame, even in the Florida warmth. Behind her, Vivian saw a tidy apartment with photos on the wall and fresh flowers on a table. You are the FBI agent, Eleanor stated. Her voice was surprisingly strong and clear, not at all frail. The one who married into that Hartwell family. Yes, ma'am. How did you find me? I keep an eye on them. Eleanor Sells' gaze sharpened. All of these years I have kept an eye on them. Every death, every sickness, every strange event. I have waited 40 years for someone to finally ask these questions. Vivian leaned closer. Mrs. Mitchell, please tell me what you saw in 1987. Eleanor's face grew stern. The memories were distant, but the hurt was still there. I was employed by the Hartwell family from 1981 to 1988. For 7 years I was their housekeeper, and sometimes their cook. I was 36 when I began, just trying to earn a living for my daughter after my husband was gone. And Richard Hartwell. Mr. Richard was a very good man. Eleanor's voice grew softer. He was kind and fair, and he paid better than anyone. He treated his staff like people, not servants. He always remembered our birthdays and asked about our children. When my daughter was accepted to college, he helped with her tuition and never expected a thing for it. What about his wife? Mrs. Dorothea was not the same. The kindness vanished from Eleanor's tone. She was cold and always planning. Everything had to be just right. The house, the meals, how things looked to others. She was always smiling, but her eyes never smiled with her. At first, I thought she was just under a lot of stress from running a large home and raising 2 young sons. What made you think differently? Eleanor's hands shook just a little. It was the only hint of the emotion she felt. It was the week before Richard passed away. I went to the kitchen very early one morning, around 4 or 4:15. I had left my eyeglasses there the evening before. I needed them for my daughter's graduation that weekend. I used the service entrance and was as quiet as I could be. I did not want to disturb anyone. What did you see? Mrs. Dorothea was standing at the counter. She was wearing her robe, and her hair was down. I had never seen her looking anything but perfect. She held a small brown glass bottle with no label on it. Vivian's pulse began to race. What was she doing with it? She was pouring something into Mr. Richard Oct's coffee machine. He made a fresh pot every single morning at 6 o'clock sharp. It was his routine, and Mrs. Dorothea knew that. Could you see the contents of the bottle? Not well. It was dark, but the liquid was a greenish color, and she was so careful, measuring each drop as if she were using a recipe. What did you do? I left. Eleanor's voice was firm. It was the voice of a woman who had accepted her past decisions. I was just as quiet leaving as I was coming in. She never saw me. I told myself I must have imagined it, or that I misunderstood. Mrs. Dorothea was a difficult woman, but I could not believe she would do what I thought I had seen. But you kept a close eye on Mr. Richard that week. I watched, Eleanor confirmed with a nod. He began to feel ill, dizzy, and confused. He lost his color. Then his kidneys began to fail. The doctor called it a sudden, tragic, and unexplainable illness. And after he was gone, I spoke to the police. Eleanor's jaw grew tight. I gave them a statement. I told them exactly what I witnessed. The detective nodded his head and wrote it all down. He said he would investigate. He claimed they took every report seriously, but then nothing was done. Eleanor let out a bitter laugh, full of 40 years of anger. Nothing ever happens to the Hartwells. That detective retired just 2 months after my statement with a full pension and a new house. The case was officially closed as death by natural causes, and I was quietly let go from my job. Dorothea fired you? Mrs. Dorothea announced they had to cut back on staff after the funeral. She called it budget concerns, but she stared right at me when she said it. She looked directly into my eyes. Eleanor's voice became a whisper. She knew. She knew I had talked to them. She knew what I saw. Did she ever threaten you? Not with words. Never with words. That is not how she operates, Eleanor said, shaking her head. But a month later, I received a letter from a law office. It was a reminder about the confidentiality paper I signed when I started. It reminded me that making false claims has legal consequences. It reminded me that the Hartwell family employed very powerful lawyers. So, you kept silent for 40 years. Eleanor's sharp eyes looked into the camera without blinking. But I did not forget, and I never stopped paying attention. Eleanor reached just out of view and brought back a worn leather journal. It was faded and filled with newspaper articles and notes. I started writing this after Mr. Richard's funeral. Every time I read about the Hartwells in the news, every unusual death, every strange sickness, every person who got too close and then vanished, she opened the journal for the camera to see. It showed page after page of notes, dates, names, and details. Newspaper articles were taped in the margins. It was a map of bodies that went back 4 decades. Mrs. Dorothea's sister's husband, in 1994, fell ill after he would not lend her money. He was dead in 2 months. She flipped the page. David Porter, in 2003, voted against her at the foundation. He was dead in 6 weeks. Another page. The young women who dated her sons, at least 4 of them that I know of, all became sick with a mystery illness. They all disappeared, and they all stayed silent. She looked up, her eyes now filled with tears. 40 years of watching, 40 years of knowing the truth, 40 years of feeling helpless to stop her. I knew that one day someone would need this, she said. One day someone strong enough would finally stop her. I have prayed for that every single night. Vivian's throat felt tight. Mrs. Mitchell, would you be willing to testify in court if I am able to build a case against her? Eleanor's reply was instant. I have been waiting 40 years to testify. I will be there. You just need to tell me when and where. Vivian ended the call and sat quietly. The journal, the witness statement, Caroline S. smoothie cup, the lab results, 40 years of evidence, 40 years of Dorothea getting away with murder. Her phone began to ring. It was Margot. Did you see it all? Margot asked. I saw it. There is more. I have been looking at the financial papers. The death in 1994, James Manning. He had a life insurance policy for $300,000. The beneficiary was his wife, Barbara, who was Dorothea's sister. 2 months later, Barbara loaned $50,000 to Dorothea for charity work. Margot's voice was serious. So, Dorothea killed her sister's husband to get money. It certainly seems that way. And David Porter was in the way of a real estate deal. That deal would have earned the Hartwell Foundation $5 million. After he died, the deal was approved. It is a pattern of murder after murder. I have to take this information to Kincaid, Vivian said. But you are on leave. Then it has to go through you as part of your official investigation. There was silence on the other end of the line. Margot was thinking. If do this, she said slowly, and I am wrong. If this evidence is not strong enough, if the Hartwells get their lawyers and make this all disappear, my career will be finished. If we are right, you will have captured a serial killer who has been active for 4 decades. And if they cover it up just like they have covered up everything else? Vivian thought of Eleanor Mitchell, 83 years old, who had waited 4 decades for justice. Then at least we will have tried. At least we did not stay quiet. There was another long pause. Then send some fees, absolutely everything you have. I will speak to Kincaid on Monday morning. That evening, Vivian got a call from Agent Kincaid Hartwell. His voice was different than usual, sharper and more focused. Dawson showed me some very interesting information. Yes, sir. The witness statement from 87, the journal, the analysis of the pattern, the money connections. He paused. It is very convincing. Yes, sir. I am approving you for limited duty. On Monday morning, I need you in my office at 8 o'clock. We are going to examine everything you have. Vivian shut her eyes. The sense of relief was powerful. Thank you, sir. Do not thank me yet. This whole thing could still end badly for us. But you are right about the chance. If it is possible someone has committed murder for 40 years, there is, sir. I am sure it was her.
And we need to catch her.
The phone call ended. Vivian sat alone in her dark living room. All the evidence was spread out on the coffee table. It was the burden of 40 years of hidden crimes. She remembered Kincaid saying, "You were right." She felt no victory, no sense of satisfaction. Being correct did not fix the harm. It did not bring back Richard Hartwell or James Manning or David Porter. It did not give Caroline her child or her ability to have more. It did not fix her own marriage or bring back Grant's trust. But it was a beginning. The real work would start tomorrow. The case moved forward much faster than expected. After 3 weeks of intense work, they had warrants and court orders. Getting permission to exhume the bodies took 2 weeks. Nobody wanted to dig up graves based on accusations from one pregnant agent against her very wealthy mother-in-law. But the evidence continued to grow. Richard Hartwell's body was exhumed on December 15th. The toxicology results arrived 5 days later. Traces of ethylene glycol were still in the bone marrow after 37 years. The results for James Manning were the same. The results for David Porter were also the same. They had confirmed 3 murders and 1 attempted murder. Decades of secrets were finally being revealed. The warrant for Dorothea Hartwell was approved on December 23rd. It was the day before Christmas Eve. Kincaid asked Vivian to come to his office. "We have enough," he told her. His voice sounded heavy. It was the voice of a man who had seen many awful things but could still be shocked. Murder 1. 3 counts of murder. 2 counts of attempted murder. 1 for you and 1 for Caroline Hartwell. There might be more charges later on. Vivian nodded slowly. Her heart should have been pounding. Instead, a strange calm washed over her. When are we going in? Tomorrow, on Christmas Eve. She is having her yearly party at the estate. 50 guests, a string quartet and champagne. The whole high society crowd will be there. He took a breath. It is the best time to arrest her with no way to escape. All of her powerful friends will see who she truly is. I want to be there. Consincade looked at her closely. Are you certain about that? This involves your husband's family, your mother-in-law. It is personal. That is the exact reason I have to be there. I began this, and I need to be the one to end it. He met her eyes for a long moment before he nodded. Be at the Hartwell estate at 7:30. Our backup team will be ready. We will enter at 8. Grant called her that afternoon. It was the first time he had called since moving out 3 weeks ago. It was the first real talk they had tried to have. His voice sounded broken. I just heard that federal agents are everywhere in town. They have warrants. What is going on? She was standing at the window of her empty house, the house that they had chosen together, the future they had imagined together. I was doing my job, she replied. They are saying that Mom is being arrested for murder. Yes, that is crazy. It has to be a mistake. We have the evidence. There is no mistake. We have lab results and witness statements. We have financial records and reports from 3 exhumed graves. 40 years of proof, Grant. The line was silent. The silence was heavy and broken. I should have trusted you. His voice cracked. From the very beginning, I should have listened to you. Yes, you should have. Can we please talk? Can I come to your place? Vivian recalled all the nights she had hoped for this phone call, all the times she wished he would choose her, all the ways she had once loved him. Not tonight, she told him. I have to work. She ended the call before he could say more. It was Christmas Eve at 7:45 in the evening. The Hartwell estate was shining with glowing lights. You could see crystal chandeliers through the large windows. Inside, a string quartet was playing Handel. Valet parked expensive cars in the large driveway. Women in fur coats and men in tuxedos walked up the marble stairs. 50 guests, all from the highest levels of society. They were there to enjoy the holidays with one of the most powerful families in the state. None of them suspected what was about to unfold. Vivian stood at the property's edge, a black jacket covering her maternity dress. Her FBI badge was clipped onto her belt, and Margot stood beside her. 4 other agents were stationed around the property line. Margot gently touched her arm. Are you prepared for what is next? Vivian placed a hand on her own stomach. The baby gave a little kick. 8 months along. It was almost time. I have been prepared for this since Thanksgiving. They began moving toward the mansion. The large front doors opened. The party's warmth washed over them like a tide. There was music, cheerful conversation, and the sound of champagne glasses. The air smelled of pine trees, cinnamon, and costly perfume. Vivian entered the house with 6 federal agents following her. The entire room fell quiet. 50 different faces turned to look at the door. They looked shocked and confused. Then they started to understand as they saw the badges, the weapons, and the serious faces of the federal agents who were there to make an arrest. Dorothea Hartwell was standing near the huge Christmas tree. She was 61 years old. Her silver hair was styled perfectly. She wore a red velvet dress that likely cost more than a person's monthly rent. She held a champagne glass in her hand. A diamond necklace sparkled at her neck. She looked like the perfect picture of class, of money, of someone to be respected. Her expression changed when she saw the badges, when she saw Vivian, and when she realized what was happening. The champagne glass slipped from her hand and broke on the marble floor. The crystal and golden liquid spilled across the white tile. Dorothea Hartwell. Vivian's voice was strong and clear across the silent room. It was the sound of justice that had finally come after 40 years. You are under arrest for the murders of Richard Hartwell, James Manning, and David Porter. You are also under arrest for the attempted murders of Caroline Hartwell and Vivian Hartwell. People gasped all through the crowd. They started to whisper. Someone else dropped their glass. Another person began to cry. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be held against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you are unable to afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you. Dorothea stood completely still. Her face showed a range of feelings. There was shock, then denial, and then rage. Her perfect mask was beginning to break. The true person was showing through from underneath. This is ridiculous. Her voice was like ice and sharp enough to cause pain.
I do not know what stories you have been telling, but I will make sure you lose your badge for this. I will ruin your career. I will destroy you. We have proof, Mrs. Hartwell.
Vivian moved a step closer. We have lab results from the gravy you gave me at Thanksgiving. We have toxicology reports from 3 bodies that were exhumed. We have witness statements that go back 40 years. We have financial documents that show reason for every single killing. Witness statements? Dorothea's laugh was sharp and full of scorn. Who gave them? Upset former employees. Jealous women who failed to keep the sons from Eleanor Mitchell, your old housekeeper. She witnessed what you did to your first husband. Dorothea's face turned white. For the very first time, true fear showed in her eyes. It was the fear of a person who had hidden a secret for 40 years and knew it was all coming out. That is not possible. Her voice became quiet and desperate. She signed a non-disclosure agreement. That agreement does not apply to criminal acts. Vivian moved even closer, so close she could smell Dorothea's expensive perfume. She was close enough to see the small wrinkles around her eyes, the little cracks in her perfect image. You have gotten away with murder for 40 years, Dorothea, but that all stops tonight. 2 agents started to walk forward, holding handcuffs. Do not touch me. Dorothea's calm finally broke apart. Do you have any idea who I am? Do you know what I am capable of doing to your careers, to your sad little lives? I am Dorothea Hartwell. I am the one who built this community. I have donated millions to charities. You are not allowed to do this to me. You can tell all of that to a judge. Vivian's voice was very calm, almost soft. Take her away. The handcuffs clicked shut around Dorothea's wrists. She began to scream then, a real scream. It was a sound of pure anger and total disbelief. It was the sound of a person who had never been denied anything, who had never dealt with consequences, and who believed for 40 years that she could not be touched. You. She turned sharply toward Vivian, her finger pointing like a gun.
You common and greedy little nobody. Do you believe you have won?
The Hartwells control this town. We control the judges, the lawyers, and the politicians. You will never make these charges stick. I will be free by morning, and then I am coming for you. I will come for that baby. That is enough. Constantine stepped in. His voice was sharp and full of authority. Get her out of this place. The agents guided her to the door. She continued to scream and make threats. She was still certain that her wealth and her contacts would rescue her. They would not. Vivian watched her leave. She was the woman who tried to kill her, who had murdered at least 3 people, and who had ruined lives for 4 decades. She did not feel a sense of victory. She did not feel that justice was served. She simply felt very tired. The party guests left very quickly after that. Nobody wanted to be connected to the events they had just seen. The champagne lost its bubbles. The music came to a stop. The pretty lights continued to sparkle, but all the warmth was gone from the room. In just 30 minutes, the entire estate was deserted. Only the agents remained, gathering evidence and taking pictures. Vivian stood by herself in the library. The lights from the Christmas tree bounced off the shiny wood in red, gold, and green. The ornaments were gleaming. She went over to the tree and found the ornament for Grant. His name was written in gold letters. He was 5 years old, the same year his father passed away. Next to his was Preston's ornament from when he was 2 years old. There were no ornaments for the wives. There were no ornaments for the grandchildren. There were only the Hartwell sons. They were the only ones Dorothea saw as her true family. Everyone else could be replaced. Vivian carefully removed Grant's ornament from the tree. She held it in her hand. The gold felt cold on her skin. She was not sure why she decided to take it model. She was not sure what to do with it, but it felt significant. It was a small part of the Grant he was before his mother molded him into a man who could not trust his own wife, a man who could not choose her. She slipped it into her pocket. Outside, the first snowflakes of winter started to drift down. The trial started in March. Dorothea Hartwell entered a plea of not guilty. She retained the most expensive defense attorneys available. Her team included 7 lawyers from 4 separate firms, along with media advisors and jury selection specialists. They had expert witnesses claim the evidence was compromised and the toxicology reports were not credible. But it made no difference. The amount of evidence was simply too much to overcome. Dr. Lydia Brennan gave her testimony on the toxicology. She explained with scientific precision how certain metabolites could stay in bone marrow for decades. She detailed how the levels found were consistent with deadly amounts and that there was no innocent explanation for her findings. Eleanor Mitchell took the stand to describe what she witnessed in 1987. At 83 years old, she was incredibly sharp. Her voice was strong and unwavering as she recalled seeing Dorothea put something into her husband's coffee machine. The defense lawyers tried to attack her credibility. They said she was too old and her memory was failing. Eleanor remained firm. "I have waited 40 years to share this story," she stated. "I can recall every single detail. I remember the bottle she was holding. I remember the color of the liquid inside, and I remember the expression on her face when she believed nobody was looking." Caroline then testified about the smoothie and her miscarriage. She spoke of 5 years of suspicion while being too scared to say anything. The defense attorneys attempted to portray her as an unstable woman, bitter because she could not have children, but Caroline did not back down either. "She took my baby from me," she said, her voice trembling but firm, "and then she took away my chance to ever have another. I am not bitter, I am speaking the truth." And then it was Vivian's turn to testify. She spent 6 hours on the stand revealing every single detail and piece of evidence. She laid out every moment of Dorothea's calculated cruelty for the jury to see. The defense lawyer tried every tactic. He tried to frame Vivian as a vengeful daughter-in-law with a hidden motive, a federal agent who misused her authority for personal gain, and a pregnant woman whose judgment was flawed. Vivian responded to every question with calm and thorough answers, showing no anger. "Mrs. Hartwell, is it not a fact that your relationship with the defendant was difficult from the very start? It is a fact that the defendant never accepted me as part of her family. It is also a fact that she tried to murder me and my unborn child. And you want this jury to believe that a respected member of society, a woman who donated millions to charity, is actually a serial killer. I want this jury to believe the evidence, the lab reports, the eyewitnesses, the financial documents, and the pattern of questionable deaths over 4 decades." Vivian looked directly at the lawyer. "The evidence tells the story. I am just the one who finally paid attention." The defense attorney was left with nothing more to say. The jury deliberated for 3 days, 3 long days of not knowing, of wondering if justice was finally within reach. Vivian spent that time in her apartment with her new daughter, Elise, who was born just 2 weeks before the trial began. She weighed 7 pounds and 4 ounces, with dark hair and blue eyes. She was perfect. Vivian named her Elise Margot Hartwell after the woman who had trusted her. On the 3rd day, the phone rang. The verdict was in. Court F-Room C at 2:15 in the afternoon. Vivian dressed, placed Elise in her carrier, and drove to the courthouse with steady hands. The courtroom was completely full. The media and the public were there. The Hartwells and their friends sat on one side, while Vivian's supporters sat on the other. The 12 jurors came in with unreadable expressions. The foreman rose to speak. "On the charge of murder in the first degree in the death of Richard Hartwell, we find the defendant guilty." A collective gasp went through the room. "On the charge of murder in the first degree in the death of James Manning, we find the defendant guilty." Dorothea's face turned white. "On the charge of murder in the first degree in the death of David Porter, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of the attempted murder of Caroline Hartwell, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of the attempted murder of Vivian Hartwell, we find the defendant guilty. Guilty on all charges." Dorothea's composure finally shattered. She jumped up and screamed with rage. "This is an outrage. This is a setup. That woman has ruined my family. She turned my own sons against me." The irony of her words was obvious to everyone. "Order in the court," the judge demanded, banging his gavel. "Mrs. Hartwell, compose yourself or you will be escorted out. I am Dorothea Hartwell. I helped build this town. I gave away millions. You cannot do this." "The evidence was undeniable, Mrs. Hartwell. The jury's decision is final. Sentencing is scheduled in 2 weeks." The guards approached to take her. She struggled against them, kicking and yelling words no one expected from such a woman. They had to drag her from the courtroom. The door swung shut, and there was silence. The sentence was life in prison with no chance of parole. The judge talked for nearly an hour about the terrible nature of her crimes. He spoke about how long Dorothea has escaped the consequences. Dorothea just listened without a word. She did not scream or struggle this time. She sat straight and tall, filled with pride, still convinced she had nothing wrong. As they led her out, she walked gracefully, her mask of composure firmly back in place. At the doorway, she stopped and turned, her gaze locked with Vivian's across the room. "This is not the end," she hem-mouthed. Vivian met her stare, completely unafraid. "Oh yes," she mouthed back, knowing Dorothea could understand her. The door closed. Vivian later sat alone in the courthouse hall. Elise was asleep in her carrier nearby, now 2 months old and growing every day. She was unaware of the chaos that had surrounded her arrival. The trial had concluded. Justice had been served. 4 decades of murder had been brought to light. Vivian was supposed to feel a sense of victory, but she did not. Instead, she just felt empty. Margot came and sat next to her. "How are you holding up?" "I am not sure," Vivian replied, watching her sleeping baby. The tiny hands, the perfect little mouth. "This does not feel the way I expected it to." "And how did you expect it to feel?" "Like a win. Like some kind of closure. Like something." Margot simply nodded. Sometimes justice is not a feeling at all. Sometimes it is just the end of injustice. It is stopping a bad thing from happening anymore. That is very insightful. I got it from Fortune Cookie. Vivian actually smiled. Grant was waiting for her just outside the courthouse doors. He seemed older and completely exhausted. 3 months of watching his family fall apart, his mother's horrible secrets coming out, and his whole life being rewritten. His eyes looked tired and his suit was messy. He had not shaved.
"Vivian?" She paused.
"Grant, I have no words." His voice was unsteady.
"I should have trusted you. I should have listened to you from the start." "Yes, you should have."
"I was so blind. She was my mother, and I refused to see who she really was." "I understand. Can we please," he said, stepping closer, "can we please try to rebuild this, be a family again?" Vivian looked at the man she had married, the man who had picked his mother over her and their child. She thought about trying to forgive him, about starting over. Then she thought about all the nights she was alone and afraid, fighting for her life while he was away. "No," she said. Her voice was quiet but clear. "I am not the same person you married, Grant. That woman had faith in you. She believed you would always be on her side." Vivian shook her head. "I cannot be that woman again. Too many things have happened. Too much has changed." "What about our daughter, Elise? We'll figure out a custody arrangement. Something fair. I would never keep her away from you," Vis said, looking at him directly. "But as for us, we are finished."
"It was finished when you chose your mother instead of me." "I did not."
"Yes, you did," she said gently but firmly. "You said I was paranoid. You moved out of our home. You left me alone and pregnant, fearing for my life and our baby's life. You chose her." Grant's face broke. Tears streamed down his face. "I am so sorry." "I know you are," Vivian said, touching his arm for a moment. "But being sorry does not erase what happened. It does not make me trust you again, and it does not make our marriage worth saving." Began to leave, then paused and looked back.
You are not like your
"Grant, you are not a bad person. She manipulated you, directed you, and formed you since the day you came into this world. But you are also not strong. You have let her dominate your entire life. Face that until you discover who you are without her influence, until you become the fan who would stand up for his wife instead of leaving her. You are not a man I can have in my life." She went to her vehicle. Elise shifted in her carrier, making a little noise. Vivian did not glance back. 6 months later, in September, her new place was smaller than the home she and Grant had. It had 2 bedrooms instead of 4. The kitchen was narrow, not the professional one she never really cooked in. The sounds of the city replaced the calm of the suburbs, but it was all hers. She had picked every piece of furniture herself. She had placed every photograph on the walls. Each choice was hers and hers alone. Elise's room was a calm sage green. Vivian's mother helped her pick the shade on a video chat. It was a color for peace, for hope, and for new beginnings. Pictures of Vivian and Elise at the park decorated the walls. Margot was there, holding Elise and pretending to discuss a case. Caroline visited with Biscuit, her rescue dog. They were both finally safe. Eleanor Mitchell held Elise in her arms just last month. She had tears in her eyes, holding the small baby she helped to save. The divorce was officially completed in July. Grant did not contest it. He did not contest a single thing. He moved to a different state. He started therapy, and he sent child support payments on time. He called for video chats 2 times a week. He was making an effort to be better. Vivian could see the change. The man he was before the manipulation was coming back. Maybe one day they could be friends and co-parents, but they could never be husband and wife again. Agent Kincaid telephoned on a Tuesday morning. He said, "Hartwell, come to my office when you've a moment." She got there at 10:30. Elise was at the office daycare. It was a great perk for working mothers at the agency. Kincaid pointed to a chair in front of his desk. "How is the baby?" "She is growing, crawling all over and putting things in her mouth she should not." He replied, "That sounds about right. My own girls did the same." A smile softened his tired face. "I have got something for you." He pushed a file across the desk toward her. Vivian opened it and read the words, then read them once more. "Supervisory Special Agent." Her voice was just a whisper. "The youngest one in the division. You deserve it, Hartwell. The Dorothea case helped us solve 4 other cold cases. Rich families with strange deaths, other clues that were ignored because no one wanted to upset powerful people." He took a breath. "You saved people, past and future. You have earned this." Vivian looked at the papers, at her name on the formal documents. There was a higher salary, her own team, everything she had ever wanted. "I have one condition," she stated. Kincaid lifted an eyebrow. "Tell me. I want to create a special task force for domestic poisoning cases, for violence between partners that does not look like violence, for the cases that are overlooked because the criminals are rich, or have connections, or are just very good at hiding the truth. That is a very big request. These are the cases nobody else wants, the victims no one trusts, the clues that everyone ignores because they choose not to see them." She looked straight at him. "Someone needs to see them." Kincaid watched her for a long time, said, "Write a proposal. I will show it to the director." October arrived with falling leaves, the smell of pumpkin spice, and the 1-year anniversary of the worst Thanksgiving in Vivian's life. She rarely thought about Dorothea now. That woman was in a maximum security federal prison with no chance of parole. The Hartwell family home was sold. The money was split between lawyers, victims' families, and charities Dorothea never supported. The family dynasty was over, but Vivian's work was just starting. The task force was approved. She led 4 agents, had a budget, and an office with her name on it. Cases arrived from all over the country. Women poisoned by husbands, men drugged by wives, and children made sick by their caretakers. They were the silent victims of hidden crimes. She could not win every case. The situations were complicated. The proof was often hard to find. The criminals were experts at looking innocent. But she could help some people, and that was enough. On Thanksgiving Day, 12 people sat around a table in Vivian's apartment. She had bought it secondhand and restored it herself. Margot Dawson was there with her husband Tom. Caroline was there, glowing and 5 months pregnant after a new round of in vitro fertilization. Her new husband, Daniel, looked at her with complete adoration. Eleanor Mitchell had come from Florida and would stay until Christmas this year. Dr. Lydia Brennan, now a good friend, was also there. 2 other women from Vivian's support group for poisoning survivors joined them. A therapist named Beth, who helped Vivian heal from everything, was also at the table. And then there was Elise, 14 months old, in her high chair. She was covered in mashed potatoes she preferred to wear instead of eat. Vivian let out a true laugh. It was a deep, genuine laugh she thought she had lost forever. "She has a good arm," Margot noted as more potatoes landed on the floor. "A future Federal Bureau of Investigation agent for sure." Time replied, "Heaven help us." The turkey was perfectly roasted. The gravy came from a jar, but no one said a word. Vivian stood at the head of the table. She looked at the faces of the people who had trusted her and stood by her when her world fell apart. "Before we begin," she said, I'd like to say a few words." The room became quiet. Elise made happy baby sounds, not knowing the importance of the moment. "A year ago, I was at a different table, in a different house, with a different family. I thought family meant only blood relatives, marriage, and duty." She paused. "I was mistaken." Caroline's eyes filled with tears. Eleanor gave a slow nod. Margot held Tom's hand tightly. "Family is made of the people who trust you when no one else will, the ones who support you through difficult times, the ones who see your true self and love you for it. They do not expect you to be small, silent, or thankful. They join your fight instead of fighting against you." She lifted her glass. "I am so thankful for the people who trusted me when it was important, for everyone who supported me, And for this little girl who gave me the courage to fight back. She glanced at every person at the table. And for new beginnings. The whole table repeated, 2 new beginnings. Their glasses clinked together. Elise tossed more potatoes. The room filled with laughter. Later that night, after the cleaning was done and the guests were gone, Elise slept in her crib. Vivian looked out her window. The city lights shone. Below, a distant siren wailed. A car horn honked nearby. Life went on. She remembered the person she was last year. Afraid, full of self-doubt, and hoping for someone to rescue her. She was waiting for her husband's trust, waiting for the world to believe what she knew. The woman in the window's reflection was not the same. She was tired, but she was also confident. She was whole. She was complete in a way that did not depend on a husband, a marriage, or a family name. She had never needed to be rescued. She just needed to trust herself. She only needed to recall her own strength, to believe in herself, and to fight. The baby monitor made a soft noise. Elise made a quiet, happy sound in her sleep. Vivian went to the nursery and stood by the crib, watching her daughter dream. At 14 months old, a long life stretched out before her. A life full of chances, challenges, and decisions. You will always know your own value, Vivian whispered. From the start, you will learn to trust your feelings. Believe in your own power. Don't let anyone make you question the truth you know. She gently touched her daughter's cheek. It was soft, warm, and real. You will grow up strong, kind, and very brave. And if anyone dares to harm you, you will resist with all of your might. The baby sighed, feeling peaceful and safe. I promise. She switched off the light. Tomorrow she had work to do. There were cases to investigate and people to save. But for tonight, this moment was perfect. And that is the story of Vivian Hartwell, the woman who would not be silenced, who followed her own intuition, and who showed that the worst monsters can hide behind pearls and serve you poison with a polite smile. If this story made you shiver, if you held your breath, if you wanted to applaud when the police locked those handcuffs on Christmas Eve, please do one thing for me. Click the like button. That lets me know you enjoy stories like this one. Leave a comment below. Tell me about a time you had a strong feeling something was not right, even when others said you were being paranoid. I would love to hear about it. Share this video with someone who needs this message, someone who has been dismissed or made to feel crazy, or who needs a reminder that their feelings are important. And if you are new here, subscribe to the channel and turn on your notifications. Each week, I share tales of regular people who confronted incredible evil and came out victorious. Always remember to trust your gut. Your instincts are there to protect you. I will be back with another story very soon.